Hi, Gary Stearman. Time for another commentary from Prophecy Watchers. Today is September 11th, 2017, the 16th anniversary of the 9/11 disaster in the northeastern United States. 9/11 reminds us that there is, in fact, a revolution going on in the Middle East that has spilled over the borders of the Middle East. It's spilled over into Europe and into the United States. If the Bible is correct, and it is, that revolution is going to continue to spill over into the world at large. What I want to talk about today is an incident that happened about a week ago in northern Syria. And I'm holding in my hands here an article written by Jonathan Feldstein, who is a writer for townhall.com. Now, there are a number of different news agencies that covered what I'm going to be talking about, but I've chosen this one because it's a very, very good report. And it's entitled, and it's a great title, What You Should Know About Israel's Air Attack in Syria and Why You Should Care. And he starts out, perhaps you didn't hear about Israel's alleged airstrike on a Syrian military installation last week. And by the way, he makes a good point for several reasons, among them that we had hurricanes in the news. The reporting from the Middle East didn't make it very far. But there was an incident about a week ago that has significant global ramifications. And Mr. Feldstein goes on, in Israel, it's always reported that incidents like these are allegedly carried out by Israel, because in most cases Israel is neither officially confirms nor denies the responsibility. This is part of a culture where all military items go through a censor. What happened? Well, in Syria, there was a chemical weapons facility. A very important facility. Now, it may have been more than a chemical weapons facility, but that's what they called it. It was a weapons manufacturing center in Syria. And Mr. Feldstein writes, often, he says, because Israel's sources are not allowed to publicize that Israel did something like this, details which are leaked to international media, which reports it without oversight of Israeli military censors, then you get more news. He says the strike on this Syrian missile and chemical weapons factory is important for a multitude of reasons. It's also noteworthy that it took place 10 years to the week after Israel's successful destruction of a Syrian nuclear facility that was being built in Syria by North Korea. Let me just let that settle in a little bit. North Korea was helping Syria build a nuclear facility? Wow. And we think of Kim Jong-un as being over there isolated all by himself in North Korea and not doing much. But there are a number of, if you will, plot lines that are all being intertwined these days. The Syrian nuclear facility was being built in Syria, in the northern part of Syria. At the same time, today in southern Syria, you have a number of weapons emplacements being stationed in southern Syria, just north of Israel, between Russian engineers and North Korean engineers. This is in southern Syria. Well, you can imagine how Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis feel about having these weapons facilities right on their borders, basically. If you've looked at a map of the Middle East, Syria isn't that far north. It's been reported that the reason for the airstrike at the time that it took place is because Israel was concerned that Syria was going to transfer the facility to Hezbollah. That's obviously a red line, he writes, as Hezbollah basically controls Lebanon and would transfer weapons there, where they have over 100,000 rockets pointed at Israel right now. And we've mentioned that in the past. So what we have on the northern border of Israel is a huge weapons buildup. Massive forces are building there. And we have the Syrians themselves, aided by the Russians, North Koreans, Oh, and did we mention Iran? All of them, in their own ways, are helping Syria. Why? To give themselves leverage in the event that Israel is attacked. They want to be positioned as close to Israel as possible. All of which brings us back to something we haven't mentioned for a while, and that's Isaiah 17, called the Burden of Damascus. Isaiah 17:1, the Burden of Damascus. Now, Damascus is a city that's been there for 4 millennia. It's an old city. It is said that the central street that goes through Damascus, called Straight Street, is, by the way, mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Acts. Straight Street has probably been there for 4,000 years. That's an old line culture. You can't even imagine that. The burden of Damascus, Isaiah 17:1, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. And then the next sentence is, the cities of Aroer are forsaken, they shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Here's the fascinating thing about this. It is rumored now that a Saudi prince, and I'm not sure which Saudi prince, but an important Saudi official, after this act by the Israelis, traveled to Jerusalem. Now, this is very unusual to have a Saudi prince traveling to Jerusalem to confer with Israeli authorities, and I think probably to see if he could cool off the fires a bit, because the Saudis do not want an explosive war on their northern borders. And yet, again, I want to read Isaiah 17. It is called the Burden of Damascus, and it describes the destruction of this 4,000-year-old city, which has never been fully destroyed before. There have been wars there, but not full destruction. As the Bible describes it, Damascus is taken away from being a city, meaning it'll be leveled at some point. It never has this happened in 4,000 years. And then let's not overlook the cities of Aroer. Where are the cities of Aroer? If you look at a map and you go south and a little bit east of Damascus, and eventually this will take you along the east side of the Sea of Galilee, the east side of the Jordan River, all the way down to Amman, Jordan. And you would be traveling through what the Bible refers to as the cities of Aroer. And so Moab, Edom, Ammon, the cities of Aroer lying to the east of the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, all of that will be involved in this battle that's upcoming. The cities of Aroer are forsaken, they shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Now, what do we have here? I'm going to turn to another article. This came from Arutz Sheva, and it was dated at the same time as the earlier article that we read. And it goes this way. Syria's deputy foreign minister, Faisal Mekdad, on Sunday, as we make this now, that's yesterday, threatened Israel with appropriate steps following an airstrike last week attributed to Israel. This is the airstrike on the chemical weapons factory that we've been talking about. The quote here from Mekdad is, "It will pay a heavy price for the attacks." He was on an Arabic television network, and he says, "We warn Israel against continuing these attacks. They will not divert attention from our war on terrorism in Syria." And so essentially Mekdad is saying, we in Damascus have a good reason for doing what we're doing, and you, Israel, should stay out of our business. There's a lot of posturing going on here. And did I mention, well, I think I did mention the Russians briefly, but the Russians are there building airports, they're importing goods. A lot of them are military weapons, and those military weapons are coming from the deep water seaports on the Mediterranean shore of Syria. So what am I saying? I'm saying that we are seeing a massive military buildup, and from time to time it makes its way into the news. That military buildup is in Syria. I want to read something. I want to go back to Ezekiel 38, which we've read 1,000 times. How many times have we read Ezekiel 38:3, and say, "Thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I hold that that is Russia." Well, Russia is already invested in Syria. And I'll turn you back, and I'll put hooks into your jaws, and I'll bring you forth. In other words, God said, I'm going to control you, Mr. Gog, and I'm going to control your army. Horses, horsemen, all of them, clothed with all sorts of army, with armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields. In other words, a fully armed force. And then comes the famous description of the army. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Gomer, Togarmah. In other words, you've got Turkey, you've got the Caucasus, you've got Northeast Africa. All of these forces are gathered with Russia. Which force is left out? Oops, there's no Syria there. There's no Damascus. Suggesting to me that Isaiah 17 takes place before the great Russian invasion, because the leaders of Damascus have apparently been wiped out prior to this great invasion in Ezekiel 38. That's why it's interesting to me to follow these news items. Back to Isaiah 17, we read this, going down to verse 12, "Woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of many waters." Perfect description of mounted armies charging. We're talking about everything from aerial weapons, ground weapons of all kinds, forces armed to the teeth. And it says, "The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee afar off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing before a whirlwind." Now, what do we have there? We have a war. We've talked about this many times. The final verse in Isaiah 17, verse 14 says, "And behold, at evening tide trouble, and before the morning he is not." He being the invading army. And particularly, he would be the recipient of all of this anger, and that would be the leader who's sitting in Damascus, which is completely destroyed. Of course, right now, this Bashar al-Assad. I'm not saying that Assad will be a part of this prophecy, but if this prophecy were to come to pass in the near future, certainly Assad would be involved with that. The fascinating thing to me is that in the back pages of the newspaper, in very remote locations on the web, you find references to these little strategic developments in Syria that I think are leading step by step to what we see in Isaiah 17, Ezekiel 38. And all of this happening with all the tumult and chaos in the United States. We've got 3 hurricanes active right now. We are, as a nation, groping our way along, developing a foreign policy, or trying to, and stability nowhere to be found. Kim Jong-un, North Korea, how about that? He's contributing to the nuclear weapons research in Syria, of all places, with Russian assistance, of all people on earth, to be there in Syria. And they're all mentioned in Bible prophecy. Just thought you might want to kind of think about that today, because we do live in that time. There's no question about it. We are the last generation, and we are awaiting the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Final statement. Through all of this, you have to remember one thing. Israel, very, very quietly, sitting on the sidelines of all the chaos and tumult, makes a quick in-and-out strike on a chemical weapons plant, says nothing at all. Nobody from the Israeli army or the Israeli government is interviewed. Everything is sort of just as it was before, except for one thing. A little chemical weapons, or who knows what else, plant has been taken out of potential battle. And that potential battle would have featured the forces of Hezbollah on Israel's northern border. It's amazing what goes on. You just have to kind of peek under the edge to see it. And we're going to continue to do that as long as the Lord gives us breath to do so. I'm Gary Stearman. Thanks for joining me today. And remember, keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.